Nobody but me knows about my father's world. I never would have thought that just hearing a story would affect me so much. My father, bald with sagging eyes, looking like he'd slept in his clothes, more than any movie I've watched or book I've read, made me feel like I was somewhere else. When he twisted his lips to speak a character's line, it wasn't like Dad giving Piglet or Eeyore a funny voice. It felt like a living being was speaking directly to me from across an ocean. The island in my father's mind was fully alive, ripe for exploration. Every time he told me a story, I was lost and rescued time and again. He concluded with a description of bird calls fading away through massive trees. I strained my ears to hear them. We sat a moment. Dad spoke. "Paul, you helped me write these stories. Why do you need to hear them?" "My name is not Paul." "I told you, Eric, it's hard for me to remember them now that I'm dead." When Dad's mind went, he started telling me incredible stories and calling me Paul. I asked around his remaining family, and according to Aunt Peggy's diary, Paul and my father had been inseparable best friends since they were 5. They even went to the same college. There wasn't much detail, but it said they were always reading to each other from their little notebooks. Paul was hit by a car on his 20th birthday. Nobody in the family could recall any stories my dad ever told. He was a quiet man. I know what I did is cruel, but if I had taken him out of this fantasy, if I told him I wasn't Paul, he wouldn't be the scintillating man with the whole world in his head anymore. He'd have been the man who worked at a car dealership his entire life, the man who never talked much, the man who shook my hand when I graduated, and that was the only time he ever touched me. The man who checked his watch throughout Mom's funeral. Old Dad. The truth is, my father is the one who let me live in a fantasy. One day out of every miserable week when I didn't have to think about my barely above minimum wage job or my bills that don't get paid. One day a week when I could live on a fantastic island where every detail stood out profoundly, where every tree and flower and rock had a place in the story. It was only fair that Dad got to believe his dead buddy's ghost wanted to see him in his smelly room, living off canned food. Why shouldn't a father and a son have secrets? "Paul," he said, "remember Hexall Beach and that weird old man?" "I told you, Eric, it's hard for me to remember now that I'm dead." Dad sighed and went quiet for a long time. Sometimes Dad's stories weren't idyllic. He told me about the monster on the island. The natives called it Mesta, which meant old friend. It had a body like a big cat's and a wide head, with eyes on the side like a rhino and no ears. It had hundreds of tiny triangular teeth. It ate only humans, never a lizard or a bird. Dad used his fingers to shape his lips to imitate the sound the beast made, which was absolutely indescribable. He told me the village guards would stay up all night singing a song that kept it away. I felt like a child when I asked him how the song went. He told me he would sing it for me later. 3 weeks ago, my sister found out. I don't know how. She must have visited Dad, and he was jabbering about Paul, and she must have put 2 and 2 together when she remembered me asking about him in Aunt Peggy's diary. She left me a voicemail saying I was sick for lying to him like that. She had no idea Dad was so far gone, and she had shown a social worker the state of Dad's house and health, and she was able to have him put in a nursing facility. I didn't call her back. I waited a couple of days to let Dad get settled in his new house, then I visited, hoping that maybe nothing had changed. Dad's room at Winter Oaks was too small. It had the kind of pictures on the wall nobody would want. Bland flowers, poorly rendered puppies, pictures just to fill space. Dad looked medicated. "Paul," he said when I came in. "Oh, hello, sorry. I thought you were someone else." We chatted about nothing for a couple minutes, then I asked him, Do you know any stories?" "Huh? That's a weird question." "Well, I remember back in the 80s at the car dealership we had this customer, Mr. Grossman. He told me a story about a man who, no matter what anybody did, just couldn't be satisfied with his Datsun. The story didn't so much conclude as it trailed off into silence. And then my father checked his watch. As I drove home depressed, I thought about the medication in his veins boiling up in the ocean surrounding the island in his mind. I thought about it rolling onto the beaches in a pink wash and dissolving the sand. I thought about it melting away the thick trunks of the trees and drowning the people and the birds. I thought about the Mesta clambering up the highest cliff, but the weakening stone could no longer support its weight, and it tumbled in a rock slide into the deadly sea. When I returned to my apartment building, I noticed the bushes in front of me were getting overgrown. I made a mental note to send an email to the super. The next day, as I was driving to work, the road was terrible. There were big potholes everywhere, and they were all filled with thick grass and tall dandelions. I couldn't believe I had never noticed them before. At work, I noticed something that just had to be new. I couldn't have missed it before. There were thick, woody vines draped from the roof and dangling from the windowsills. The next day, there was another voicemail from my sister saying that my father was missing. That was about 3 weeks ago. In the time it's taken me to write this, moss has crept up through my floorboards. I don't know how. I'm on the 3rd floor. No one, not a single person beside myself, has noticed what has happened to this city. It's humid, chokingly so, every day. The streets are cracked and pitted with grass and flowers unlike any I've seen before, with thick stems and razor-sharp leaves. This grass doesn't grow in people's lawns, though. They've been replaced with ferns that close and droop at night, but snap open their leaves in the morning. It's getting difficult to walk around, but nobody seems to pay attention. I've asked people, and they insist that the founder's oak in the park at the center of town has always been tall and twisted, choked with vines, canopied with fleshy leaves almost 4 feet long. Nobody remembers that the birds weren't always so brightly colored they startled you, or that their songs weren't so complex with squawks and crackles and booms. We haven't heard from my father. I doubt we will. How long could a demented old man last in this jungle? My bedroom is so covered with lichen and mold it feels like I'm sleeping in a tomb. At night, I hear sounds, birds calling, branches dropping, and a noise that's absolutely indescribable. A noise that sounds like hot, foul breath blowing around the corners and alleys of hundreds of teeth. I wish Dad had had time to teach me that song.